From the research bench to the patient's bedside, this is Bench to Bedside with your host, Vice Chancellor and Director of the University of Kansas Cancer Center, Dr. Roy Jensen.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Roy Jensen, Vice Chancellor and Director of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. It sounds like it's pulled straight from the plot of a science fiction movie, but more and more, doctors and scientists are finding ways to bring artificial intelligence into the clinic. But how can artificial intelligence help doctors and patients? And how is it impacting healthcare today? Dr. Prateek Sharma is here to answer all of our questions in this regard, and he is a world-renowned gastroenterologist who is leading the way that we use artificial intelligence to better diagnose and treat people with colorectal and esophageal cancers. Also joining us is Kayla Delich, a stage 3 colorectal cancer survivor. Kayla, welcome and thank you for joining us. You were 28, I believe, when you were diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Could you take us back to that day, how you heard the news?
It was just, I was going in for a routine colonoscopy. Well, not routine, but because I was so young, but just to make sure there wasn't any underlying issues as to why we were having some infertility complications. And I woke up from that day with the news that you don't have hemorrhoids, but you do in fact have rectal cancer. So that was kind of a terrifying moment for us.
So colonoscopies, which is how Kayla was diagnosed with her cancer, remain the gold standard for catching colorectal cancer in its earliest stages. However, some polyps are more difficult to detect during a routine screening. Specifically, flat polyps are believed to be the culprit for most cases of colorectal cancers that occur in people who are up to date with their colonoscopies. So how do we help people with flat polyps? Dr. Sharma, you say the answer might be artificial intelligence, which is called AI for short. Could you tell us more about this new technology?
Sure. Thank you, Roy. My pleasure to be here. And there's several ways. You're absolutely right. Artificial intelligence is probably one of the ways to help us diagnose some of these flat polyps. If we step a little bit back before artificial intelligence, simple things like having a good bowel preparation, so making sure that you follow the instructions of what we call a split dose, in which you prep half the bowel before the procedure, meaning the night before, and then the morning off. So that's one of the ways. Our endoscopes are getting much better, right? I mean, we've gone from, let's imagine, our 1-pixel camera now to the iPhone, which has a 12-pixel megapixel camera. So our endoscopes with white light have gotten better. Now we're moving into artificial intelligence, which is basically a branch of science in which machines can start doing some of these tasks that the humans can do. The example I give sometimes is that once you go to Amazon to buy a product, the next time you go, you're always surprised that it says, "Oh, do you want to buy a T-shirt?" And how do they know that the last time they bought a T-shirt? That's because in the background, the computer is learning your habits, right? Which websites are you going to? Which products are you buying? So similarly, now look at it in endoscopy. You feed the endoscopy computer with thousands and millions of images of flat polyps, of early colon cancer. The endoscope becomes smarter. So just like a smartphone, now you have a smart endoscope.
Mm-hmm. So you're looking at ways that AI can really complement the skills of an expert who's conducting the colonoscopy. It doesn't replace the doctor, correct?
Well, I hope so. I'll be out of a job if that happens, Roy. So I hope.
You hope not. You hope not.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Sorry. So no, you're absolutely right. I think all of these are ways to assist or help us with the procedure. There are studies that have shown that as the day progresses, as fatigue sets in, right? I mean, you do several of these procedures during the day. So as fatigue sets in, maybe the human eye is unable to detect the smaller or the flat polyps and stuff. So it's almost having like an extra pair of eyes in the room with this. So the way it works is that as you're withdrawing the endoscope and the polyp is seen on the screen, the computer starts flashing. It puts in what we call a bounding box around the polyp or the early colon cancer. So it alerts you to the fact. You still have to make a determination whether is it truly a polyp? Is it a cancer? Am I going to biopsy it? Am I going to resect it, remove it, things like that? So ultimately, the onus is still on the physician. And so we look at it as an adjunctive tool.
Mm-hmm. So you've already given us one example, but AI is really all around us. And in fact, data shows that the use of AI in many sectors of business has grown 270% over the last few years. What can we say about the use of AI in healthcare?
So in general, in healthcare, it is increasing. I couldn't give you the exact percentage like you've quoted, but you see it all over. And a good example is on the pathology side. So there are studies which have shown that a computer reading a breast pathology slide for breast cancer is as good as compared to a panel of 7 or 8 experts. Well, why does that happen? Well, if you look at a pathology slide, Roy, I mean, this is your area of expertise, is, you know, it's so many cells, so many structures that you have to look at. And the human eye, we are trained to look at certain structures that we have been taught about. But there may be certain things in the background that we don't know whether they're contributing towards a diagnosis. So what the machine does, it sort of learns this automatically, and this is called unsupervised machine learning, in which all you're telling the machine is, here are 1,000 slides of patients with breast cancer. Now, you haven't told the machine, look for the mitotic figures, you know, look for nuclear size. You haven't told the machine that. It's learning by itself, and so it can start picking up things that humans are not trained to do. Another example is making a diagnosis of diabetes in third world countries, right? I mean, you need to go to a doctor, you need to have a finger stick, you need to have a blood draw for a hemoglobin A1C. So a new app has been developed in which it scans the retina of a subject and it looks for changes of diabetic retinopathy. So now imagine in third world countries where everyone has a smartphone, but they don't have access to physicians or can't afford seeing physicians. So for mass screening, for example, you can use an app on your phone, put it in front of your eye, it scans it, and it tells you whether you are at a high risk for diabetes or not. The other mundane tasks, so for example, when we do a procedure, colonoscopy, like the one that Kayla has undergone, the way it happens is, you know, she doesn't remember because she was probably sedated during the procedure, but after the procedure has been performed, you know, the endoscopist goes to the dictation room and then, you know, scribes that note. It takes us about 10 or 15 minutes to do that, and editing, you know, downloading images, etc. That's an additional 10 or 15 minutes that I could have spent talking to Kayla about her procedure, her experience and stuff before the next patient rolls in. AI is working with solutions on that while you're doing the procedure, you're just scribing the note, saying, okay, I see a polyp, it's this big. The scribe or the machine's hearing this in the background, it's already dictating, typing the report. So when I'm ready to leave the room, the report's in my hand, I sign it, and so then I can go to Kayla or my next patient and have a conversation with her, which is more important than spending all this time that we spend in front of computers typing a report.
Well, that's an incredibly exciting, you know, some possibilities there. But for some, I think the increasing use of AI in doctors' offices and hospitals may be a little worrisome to them. But you obviously seem pretty optimistic. Could you tell us why you see this as a very positive development?
Yeah, good question, Roy. I mean, and there are several still challenges with AI, and of course, I'm biased towards this, and that's why, you know, you're hearing the enthusiasm in my voice. But there are challenges. There are ethical issues surrounding it. comments that you make is who's responsible for the diagnosis, because you can't hold a computer responsible for a diagnosis. It ultimately lies on the physician. So there are all these challenges that we are working towards, but I'm still optimistic that this is not going, we shouldn't look at this as replacing physicians or replacing healthcare or stuff. It's supposed to make it more efficient. It's supposed to make it more effective. It's supposed to improve patient outcomes. And at the end, Eric Topol, one of the pioneers in this, said that this is allow the physician to do what he or she was supposed to do, which is spend time with the patient.
Right.
Because right now we spend so much time with mundane stuff which is not related to patient care. So that's why I'm just very optimistic about this. But just like with new technology, there will be hurdles along the way. Who's going to pay for it? Will there be reimbursement for this? I mean, there are a multitude of challenges, but I think we'll work through it.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously a great ambassador for this. And in fact, you are the chair of the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy AI Task Force. So you're really at the center of all of these developments. And that group was brought together to really focus experts across many different fields to identify the best ways to bring AI into the clinic. Could you tell us about some of the things that the task force is doing to make this technology a reality?
Sure. I mean, the reason the society formed the task force was for multiple reasons that we've been discussing. Number one is to let the physicians take the lead in this and tell industry and tell all the stakeholders in the field, right from the tech industry to computer scientists to NIH to the FDA, who has approval over these softwares, and tell them what are the use cases that we should be focusing on. And we've obviously started off with colonoscopy and colon polyps, but then the next thing after that will be looking at Barrett's esophagus, esophageal adenocarcinoma, gastric cancer, and so on and so forth. So that's one. The second is education. So we have a global AI summit once a year that we hold, which again is open, not just to gastroenterologists, but again to patients, to computer scientists, data scientists, because they help us in developing that. So that's a forum that we want to get all stakeholders in AI together. Have the FDA there to tell us, what kind of studies they need in order to approve these devices. We are working with the NIH to have separate sort of funding mechanisms for AI in gastroenterology and endoscopy. And then to our members and to the physicians to exactly teach them about these simple things. What is AI? Why should we not be concerned about it, thinking that they're going to replace us? How can we work together with industry in moving this forward? And then finally to our patients is how can we improve the care that we are providing you?
Right. Well, that's really incredibly exciting. And if you're just joining us, we're here with Dr. Prateek Sharma discussing the exciting world of artificial intelligence and how it may help us treat and diagnose cancer patients. Also, Alexis Del Cid is here to take your questions. Hi, Alexis.
Hi. Sam has a good question. It's for Dr. Sharma. He wants to know where you draw the line as far as, is there anything you would not trust artificial intelligence to do?
So yeah, good question. I think it's still early on, Sam and Alexi, thank you for the question about where do you draw the line for these things. So one application that we are looking in colonoscopy, for example, is, going back to Kayla's case about colorectal cancer, is if you see a lesion or a polyp, it could be harboring either dysplasia or cancer. Now, there are algorithms which we call CADX algorithms, which are available to tell us, is this cancer, is this dysplasia, is this just a simple hyperplastic polyp? And then if it's cancer, the machine can also tell us how deep is the extent of this. So again, going back to our initial discussion with Roy, saying where do you draw the line is, you also have to trust your training. And as a physician, how do you treat a cancer? You don't wait for a machine to tell you that. So these will all be helping us. In the training process, I think it will give us tools to help train our next generation of fellows much better to do that. So the ultimate, I think the buck stops with the physician. Right. So you take assistance from all different sources. This is just yet another tool.
I have another question from June, and I think this really gets every woman's attention. You hear a young woman, 28, is diagnosed with this type of a cancer that Kayla was diagnosed with. June wants to know how rare it is to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer at 28, and she also wants to know from Kayla if that was just a common test to have a colonoscopy when you're having fertility problems. They had you go get a colonoscopy, and that's how you found out you had cancer.
I'll let Kayla answer first. Please
Kayla.
Go ahead, Kayla.
Is that a common test when you're having fertility struggles?
No, not really. That was not the first thing that we went to. I had seen my OBGYN. We had tried a couple of different things along with like chiropractic care and some other things. And ultimately I was experiencing some really inconsistent bleeding off and on throughout my time from like 2017 to 2020 when I was diagnosed. And they just always kind of brushed it off as it was hemorrhoids, like not to worry too much about it. And so finally I was like, well, can we just go look? Let's make sure. I had a rectal exam done and they said, yep, I think it's hemorrhoids. I can kind of feel it. But we went in and did a colonoscopy just to be sure, because I wanted to know, like, well, what can we do about it? And I was lucky enough that my sister worked for a GI doctor. So that's kind of what ultimately got us down that road. And when I woke up with the news, like, you have rectal cancer, it was just very terrifying. I was alone. It was in the middle of the height of COVID, like right after the nation opened up. So it was just a very whirlwind moment.
That's so alarming, but she really advocated for herself.
Right.
So how rare is her case?
So, a couple of points and things that Kayla has nicely highlighted about is the symptom, right? So we need to differentiate screening, which means that you're looking for colon polyps, colon cancer in asymptomatic individuals versus having symptoms such as the bleeding, which it sounds like that Kayla was experiencing. So if there are folks who have symptoms, and we call them alarm symptoms, so such as, rectal bleeding, anemia, unexplained weight loss, abdominal pain, which is, associated with some of these symptoms, you need to go and see your doctor right away, because, those are alarm symptoms. That's not screening. Screening colonoscopy or screening for any cancer means that it's recommended for average risk individuals, means that you either reach a certain age or a threshold, and then a test is recommended for you. Now, talking about, Kayla's case about is this rare, I would say it isn't rare, it's uncommon. But we are seeing, according to latest statistics, that unfortunately colorectal cancer is impacting individuals who are younger and younger. So just to put that in perspective is that up till about a year or two ago, the screening age for colorectal cancer was 50 years. So once the general population, you reach 50 years, you should undergo screening for colorectal cancer. That was the recommendation. Recent data over the last 5 or 10 years has shown that folks are getting cancer at a much earlier age. And therefore, all the societies, including our GI societies and the American Cancer Society, has dropped that age for screening down from 50 to 45. So now the recommendation is that once you reach age 45, general public, without symptoms, you should get screened for colorectal cancer. But obviously, if you're having symptoms, alarm symptoms, specifically bleeding, rectal bleeding, you should see your doctor right away.
All right. So one point I just want to emphasize is that you made the very important distinction that for the general public. What about for families that have a history of colon cancer in that family?
Right. So absolutely. I mean, I think once you have a positive family history, you again have to, it's an important thing to inform your gastroenterologist or your oncologist about it, because it has impact for your family members. It has impact for you yourself, in the sense that when the cancer is diagnosed, there's certain testings for mutations on the tumor which needs to be conducted, and then there may be additional testing of your family members, including your siblings and your kids, that may need to be done in that situation. So it's extremely important, Roy, very good point, to inform your gastroenterologist or oncologist about that diagnosis.
So that's some great information, and reminds me to make sure that you share this link with people you think might benefit from this discussion, and use the hashtag #BenchToBedside. So let's switch gears, or ends, as the case may be, and talk endoscopy, which is a valuable tool in the early detection of esophageal and stomach cancer, and certain other diseases like Barrett's esophagus. And you're obviously one of the world's experts in Barrett's esophagus. How will the work in AI with colonoscopy impact the endoscopy recommendations, do you think?
Right. So again, colonoscopy is the much more frequently performed procedure. Colon cancer, is much more prevalent. So for example, annually in the US, we still have 150,000 cases of colorectal cancer which are diagnosed. You compare that to upper GI cancers, that's closer to about 50,000 or so when you put together esophageal cancer and gastric cancer. So the magnitude is obviously in colorectal cancer. So that's why we've started with the AI programs in colonoscopy, because that's more commonly performed, it's much more prevalent. But the same principles that apply in colonoscopy will be applied, or are being applied, for Barrett's esophagus, esophageal cancer, and gastric cancer. The reason being is by the time these lesions become very big, they're probably, unresectable for a cure. So you do want to diagnose them early on. In order to diagnose them early on, these lesions need to be detected by the human eye because they're so small. For example, in Barrett's esophagus, the cancer may be absolutely flat with just some minor changes in the red color of the tissue, which maybe only experts who may have seen several of those cases can diagnose. Same thing for gastric cancer, is that the gastric cancer may appear like a simple ulcer in the stomach. Right, from taking aspirin or Advil or things like that, you can get an ulcer in your stomach. So that's where I think, again, artificial intelligence, more so in upper GI cancers because they're more uncommon, I think will be of immense help to endoscopists in order to alert them that, oh, I see something wrong, perhaps take a biopsy from here. So I think we will reduce the miss rate, and hopefully our detection rates of early upper GI cancers will increase with the help of applying artificial intelligence to upper endoscopy.
Mm-hmm. So ultimately, obviously the role of AI in endoscopy and colonoscopy is going to be determined by clinical research and clinical trials. Are there clinical trials that you have open right now that are available for patients to be recruited into?
Yes, so we've actually finished 2 trials of using artificial intelligence in colonoscopy, and we have currently one which is open and is ongoing. And the way these studies are conducted, these are randomized controlled trials. So patients get randomized either or by a flip of a coin, so as to say. You get either the standard colonoscopy, which is the current standard of care, versus a colonoscopy with artificial intelligence built into it. And then we try to determine if one is better than the other. And so if folks go on to clinicaltrials.gov, they can easily figure out these different trials which are available. For those who are tuning in from outside of Kansas City, you can look at it from other areas in your region where such trials may be available.
All right. So, Alexis, do we have any additional questions?
Yes, Gretchen wants to know if there's an age limit for clinical trials. Is there a specific demo you're looking for?
No, so it's actually, the age limit is usually based on the screening age limit, which is 45 to about 75 years or so. And so that's the population that we enroll, because that's what the guideline supports, that screening should be done in that population.
What would that say to Kayla then, who has this getting this cancer at 28, so she wouldn't have fit the requirements for a clinical trial, she doesn't fit the suggestions for when you're supposed to get a colonoscopy, she just advocated for herself, which I've heard both of you talk about the importance of. What do you tell a young woman like that?
Yeah, so again, good question. And, it's unfortunate that in Kayla's case, she is the first case in her family in which, this cancer happened at such a young age. When I see patients like Kayla, my question is, did somebody else in your family have it, right? And what happens is then you start talking about your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and you don't know, right? At what age did they die? And did they have colonoscopy or not? Were they diagnosed with colon cancer or not? So it starts off with those things. So, in that age, it's not screening anymore, right? Because otherwise you'd have to put the entire US population through a invasive procedure, screening, to diagnose one cancer, right? Which doesn't make sense. So that's why you have screening guidelines. And screening means it's applicable for the general population.
Right.
Now, Kayla, because she was having symptoms, doesn't fall in the general population. She was symptomatic, meaning that she had specific symptoms. So again, I think as Roy also mentioned, it's extremely important, if for not just for colon cancer, but for other cancers also, if you start developing symptoms which may be suggestive of a certain organ system disease, you need to report that to your physician. And that takes a whole different game, spin, rather than screening. When we talk about screening, it means somebody sitting at home without any symptoms, and
Right.
You put them through a test. That's screening.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've talked about colonoscopy, endoscopy, pathology, all being impacted by AI in the relatively near future, it sounds like. What other areas of medicine do you think that AI will have an impact in?
So, Roy, I think it's going to be all of it. One thing that I don't know if you mentioned radiology. So radiology is the field which has been actually at the forefront of artificial intelligence, and anything which deals with images, pictures, videos, that is prime for artificial intelligence to be applied towards it. An MRI, an MRI has hundreds of images within there, and now we are expecting a busy radiologist to go through those and 20 MRIs in a day. And so that's also where AI helps you in, detect that. You take it, so what we're talking about is the detection part. Then the next step is AI making the diagnosis. So not only, so if on an MRI it sees a lesion in the liver, it will help you characterize it. Does it look, is it more of a hemangioma? Is it a simple cyst? Or is it a cancer? That's also where AI can play a role. Furthermore, picking up lymph nodes, staging the cancer for you. So I think in the cancer journey of a patient, I think AI in the future, you talked about science fiction. It's like when you see in those Star Trek movies or, the Star Wars movies, you have a scanner and it tells you, right? You're working on blood tests now, which can, look at telomeres or things and tell you whether, you're at a high risk or not. So I think it will be the whole spectrum from, early diagnosis to characterization to staging. And then it also helps in drug discovery and drug development. AI has a role there as well. So I think it's going to be across the entire spectrum.
Well, as we're closing out, we just want to say, Kayla, we're so appreciative of you being on the show this morning. And, you were only 28 years old when you're diagnosed with colon cancer, and that is just so young. And, what advice would you have, for people that are in a situation where maybe they don't quite, fit the guidelines? What led you to, get to where you needed to be for your own health care?
I would just encourage everybody to become your best advocate. Nobody knows your body better than you do. Also, I think as young women, we pass off a lot of things like pregnancy and childbirth and some of the aftermath of those things. And if something doesn't feel right or something doesn't seem right, and you just keep getting some answers and you're just not feeling 100% confident in that, go seek out more information, keep asking good questions until you find, go get the answers. Make sure somebody can prove to you that it is a hemorrhoid or some other underlying cause for, any type of bleeding. Or I did not experience weight loss. So I think that was a little bit tricky. It was just that we needed to figure out why we were experiencing infertility, and it just kind of started there and it snowballed from there. So just be your best advocate because you know your body best.
All right. Well, thank you. Alexis, any final questions?
I'm just so glad Kayla is doing well and really pushed for herself, because I don't know that a lot of us would have been that persistent. How are you feeling today? That's my question. I see you're back at school. Are you a teacher?
Yeah, I do. I teach fifth grade in Turner at Junction Elementary. We're pretty busy right now, gearing up for spring break, but I feel pretty good. It's been almost a year since I had my APR surgery. Everything's healed well. I'm feeling well. I'm back to doing pretty much everything as normal, my new normal, as much as I can. And I'm just very thankful.
All right. Well, thank you again for being part of this week's episode of Bench to Bedside. To learn more about Dr. Sharma's efforts in the AI realm, visit kucancercenter.org/AI. That's it for today. Join us next week at 10 a.m. for Bench to Bedside. Thanks for watching.
You're welcome.
Subscribe to our Bench to Bedside podcast, now everywhere podcasts are available.